The Elixa V6 upgrade is the most significant yet, so it warrants a video where I'm going to explain all of the changes, because all of the changes that have been made from V5 to V6 are more significant than the changes from V1 all the way through to V5. Here are the changes in brief, and then I'll explain them more in the video. The most significant is the change in the bacterial species, and this goes hand in hand with the addition of a specially formulated prebiotic. The capsule shell has been upgraded. There is a new timing for the consumption of the probiotic part of the course. The course has increased in length, and there's a specific reason for this. And there is now a maintenance protocol, which is not simply taking a daily probiotic, and I'll explain this more in the video. So the new Elixa protocol, in a nutshell, involves taking Elixa probiotic at night, which I'll explain why later, and then 8 hours later, taking a prebiotic which has been specially formulated to feed the species which are in the Elixa blend. All versions of Elixa before V6 and also including V6 work along the principle of a targeted antimicrobial, as opposed to the conventional claim about probiotics as replacing missing species in the gut. So we're viewing gut dysbiosis as the presence of an infection, essentially, a chronic and in some ways low-level infection, rather than missing species in the gut. Now V6 works in the same way as all the previous versions of Elixa. It uses this targeted antimicrobial approach. Now in this video I'm just going to refer to microbes as bacteria, but dysbiosis does involve more than just bacteria. It can involve yeast and other microorganisms. So with conventional probiotics, if we think about a garden filled with flowers, the conventional view on dysbiosis, according to many probiotic supplement sellers, is that the garden is lacking a few special species of flower. And if you take a probiotic supplement, you can replace those missing species of flower, and the garden will overall function better. Your gut will function better, and your health in general will be better. The way I view things is that the garden has a problem because it has weeds present, and the removal of those weeds is the first thing you need to do, because it's the presence of those weeds which is the proximal problem, even though in the first place it may have been that a lack of a variety of flowers was what allowed the weeds to proliferate in the first place. Now that they've actually proliferated and are present, you need to target them directly, and you do this with a targeted antimicrobial approach. So obviously these weeds are analogous to the bad bacteria in the gut, and the flowers are analogous to the good bacteria in the gut and also the probiotics that you would take. But what exactly makes these bad bacteria bad? It's quite simple, really. They produce toxins, they produce toxic chemicals, they produce endotoxins, and they inflame the intestinal immune system, they inflame the liver, they derange the entire immune system, and this is not only basic inflammation or the innate immune system, this is also the adaptive immune system. Now this approach was working very well with the previous versions of Elixa. Go in with a high amount of beneficial bacteria which produce bacteriocins, fungicins, basically antimicrobial products, and antibiofilm. They exhibit antibiofilm activity as well. But we want to take things further with V6. We want to take things further more than simply taking a higher and higher dose, because there are mechanisms that prevent simply taking more and more and more and more, resulting in a better outcome. Now you still do need to take a lot, and a lot more than a conventional probiotic, but the method we're going to use now is to add a prebiotic to it. Now this might sound very basic. Everyone knows that you should take a prebiotic with a probiotic because the prebiotic feeds the probiotic. But actually what a lot of people don't realize is that feeding up lactobacilli in the intestine is not something you want to go overboard with. And this is why with previous versions of Elixa I never recommended to take a prebiotic. I recommended against taking a prebiotic. With V6, we've managed to formulate a bifidobacteria-only blend with no lactobacilli. This allows us to fuel it as much as possible without any downside that can sometimes arise from feeding too much prebiotic into the milieu of lactobacilli. Lactobacilli were very beneficial because they are actually potent in their antimicrobial activity, but if we want to take things further and expand the volume, the number of beneficial bacteria in the gut beyond what you can simply contain in a dose of probiotic, then we need to make it such that we can have no limitation on the amount of prebiotic we can fuel it with. Not only is feeding them prebiotic going to increase their numbers, but it's also going to make them metabolically active, and it's going to cause them to produce certain metabolic outputs which are beneficial. Now this will occur anyway, just whenever they're present in the gut, but certain prebiotics can bias them towards producing certain type of outputs, and these are beneficial. The other reason why we generally recommend people don't take a prebiotic is because it was very much like rolling the dice. You didn't know whether it was going to feed up the good at the expense of the bad, or to feed up the bad and worsen your problem. It may also feed up good and bad and worsen your problem with a few benefits along with it. But with only taking a probiotic before, it eliminated that risk. However, with the new prebiotic that I've formulated with Elixa, it's a combination of three different substrates. It's been designed in a way that to put it simply, the chemical structure, the chemistry, the linkages of these sugars, and also the length of these carbohydrates are much more conducive than just a single basic prebiotic in terms of causing beneficial bacteria to proliferate at the expense of problematic bacteria. So what we want to do with the Elixa course, the V6 course, is to put a massive amount of bifidobacteria into the gut, to fuel it with an intelligent amount of prebiotic, and allow for proliferation to take place in the gut to competitively exclude these problematic microbes. So let's discuss the prebiotic. There's this definition of a prebiotic floating around, which is that it's something which only feeds beneficial bacteria and doesn't feed problematic bacteria. Now that is the definition, I believe, in certain places, but the reality is that no such thing exists. There isn't a substrate which only feeds beneficial bacteria and doesn't feed problematic bacteria. However, you can obviously get certain substrates which are more likely to feed good bacteria. They are more readily metabolized by good bacteria, and they are less easily metabolized by bad bacteria. And so they do tend to bias in favor of proliferation of good bacteria. Now, if you can look deeper into the genetics of microbes and the enzymes that they express, so the genes that they express and the enzymes that these genes code for, you can actually make a blend which is going to be optimized towards that end goal of proliferating beneficial microbes at the expense of problematic microbes. And that's what my aim is with the Elixa prebiotic. So it contains three different substrates. It contains xylooligosaccharides, galactooligosaccharides, and fructooligosaccharides, and they are in a certain ratio. The reason I've chosen these is threefold. Firstly, all of them independently have demonstrated benefit in clinical trials. So scientific studies where they've assayed the microbiota before and after, each one of those on its own has exhibited some benefit. Another important thing is simply that the anecdotes and reviews online suggest that these prebiotics, independently on their own, are actually beneficial. That's obviously a very important thing. And then a little bit more technically and more specific to Elixa and why the prebiotic is specifically well suited to the probiotic is that the chemistry of the prebiotic matches the enzyme expression of the bacteria in Elixa. Now I'll talk about the capsule shell. So what do we want in a capsule shell? Well, we want it to protect the bacteria, obviously, and we're trying to protect the bacteria against the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and also bile salts. Previously, I've used a capsule shell which was essentially relying on a time-based disintegration profile. So it would disintegrate after a certain amount of time in the digestive tract. Now this is good because amount of time tends to be proportional to how far it's gotten through the digestive tract. So after 3 hours, it's more likely to have gotten past the stomach than if it disintegrated in 20 minutes. However, what you really want is something that doesn't disintegrate in the stomach and does disintegrate in the intestine. And the difference between those environments, or the difference we're going to take advantage of in this case, is the pH difference. So the stomach is acidic and the intestine is not acidic, or less, or the pH is higher. So the new capsule shell is extremely effective at retaining its integrity in a low pH environment and disintegrating once it exits that low pH environment. So in other words, it stays together in the stomach, and when it moves on into the intestine, it will now disintegrate after a certain amount of time has passed. You can actually test this for yourself if you take an Elixa capsule and you put it in a glass of vinegar, and then maybe you take another one, you put it in a glass of water, and you leave them for a few hours and you sort of shake them around occasionally. You'll see that the one in the acid doesn't disintegrate, but the one in the water will disintegrate after a certain amount of time has passed. The next thing that has been changed is the timing of the probiotic dose. So if you've taken Elixa before, you'll know that the probiotic was taken in the morning on an empty stomach. And only until recently, there wasn't really any recommendation to even delay eating. So in other words, you would take the probiotic in the morning on an empty stomach, and then maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes later, you would eat your breakfast. In the previous version of Elixa V5, I did start making a recommendation to leave a couple of hours in between the dose and breakfast. Now this is impractical, but it is beneficial, and it was only for the duration of a 6-day course. So I thought it was worth the hassle. However, now what I'm recommending is to take the probiotic at night, to take it just before you sleep. And the reason for this is when you consume food, the stomach, the exit to the stomach, and the peristalsis that cleans and moves things through the stomach and through the small intestine goes on pause. And this is for a good reason. You want it, when you eat stuff, you want it to be retained in the stomach and broken up as much as possible as it can in the stomach before being slowly titrated into the small intestine where further digestion occurs. So if you were taking Elixa in the morning and then eating food, it would cause the Elixa to be retained in the stomach for longer than ideal. Really, you want it there as little time as possible. Taking it at night means that there's not going to be any more food entering the stomach, at least for another 7 or 8 hours. And this means that the MMC can begin, so the migrating motor complex, which is basically a pattern of peristalsis which clears out the stomach and the small intestine. And in fact, because the capsule shell is essentially indigestible as far as the stomach is concerned, the best way to remove it on from the stomach is this migrating motor complex pattern, because indigestible substances which are above a certain size will not leave the stomach until one of these phases is entered. And if you don't eat anything after Elixa, the sooner that pattern will occur, and it will move the stuff into the small intestine. And since you'll be sleeping and you won't be eating any other food, then it will just continue to move through the small intestine until it reaches the colon, the large intestine, and it will reach there in time for the morning, which is why you take the prebiotic in the morning. You want to take the prebiotic is liquid, it's soluble, and it will move through the stomach very rapidly and also move through the small intestine rapidly. So you take them at this separate time, so that by the time that the probiotic has reached the colon, the large intestine, it will be there ready, waiting, so that in the morning when you drink the prebiotic, it will go through quite quickly, probably within an hour, and it will have the probiotic waiting for it, because you want those two things to combine to further increase the amount of prebiotic which is being consumed by Elixa as opposed to some other microbes in your gut. So why has Elixa changed from a 6-day course to an 8-day course? The reason is that with the prebiotic being present, we're now achieving higher levels of the probiotic bacteria in the gut. And these higher levels take a longer time to achieve, and there is now a period of time where the microbiota must adapt to the prebiotic. And adapting to the prebiotic happens in different stages, so it's different ecological changes. So the course is now 8 days instead of 6 days because with the prebiotic present, there is a longer period of adaptation, and I want the probiotic to be present there throughout the entire, or at least the bulk of the adaptation to the prebiotic. A very significant change is now the maintenance protocol. People would ask me in the last couple of years about whether they can take Elixa on a daily basis, whether I have some maintenance version of Elixa, and I would always tell them, no, I don't believe in that approach, because I think the gut ecosystem needs to be shifted and then stabilized, and then it will maintain itself in the new status quo if the treatment goes well. And if something is required to be taken on an ongoing basis, a probiotic, then it means the probiotic isn't actually creating a permanent change in the ecosystem. And this is not what we're after. We're after once use or occasional use solutions so that you can just resolve the problem and then just get on with all the other things in life that don't involve suffering from gut dysbiosis. So the maintenance protocol with a new version of Elixa isn't to do with taking a probiotic on a daily basis. It's to do with taking a prebiotic on a daily basis. Now this is still sort of contrary to the idea that the gut can maintain itself in a new state of health. But the justification for taking it on an ongoing basis is twofold. Firstly, although 8 days is sufficient to seed the probiotic, 8 days alone isn't sufficient to fully adapt to the volume of prebiotic that's being consumed. So you do want a longer period of time where you're taking the prebiotic to allow full adaptation to take place. The other reason is that people live in a society where it's very hard to live like a hunter-gatherer. So it's hard to consume exactly the perfect diet that we've evolved to consume. And so as a way to buffer against the unavoidable factors of modern lifestyle and modern diet, taking a little bit of prebiotic every day, which is, by the way, what the maintenance protocol is, it's taking a small amount of prebiotic every day, is just enough to basically buffer and protect you against those modern lifestyle diet factors. For those people who have taken previous versions of Elixa, you may be wondering what's actually different qualitatively about the effects of V6 versus version 1 to version 5. And people who are new to Elixa may be interested just to know what kind of effects will you experience in general. So I want to be very clear and give a disclaimer here for moral reasons and also for regulatory reasons that probiotics and prebiotics aren't, according to regulations, aren't approved to treat anything really. Elixa is sold in multiple jurisdictions. It's sold directly from my company. It's also sold from retailers that are based in other countries. So we operate in so many jurisdictions that it's best just to say from the beginning, Elixa doesn't cure anything. What I do rely on though is that there are a lot of people out there who've taken Elixa and do post online and detail what benefits they've got from Elixa. The best way to give you an idea of what to expect is to relay what early users of V6 have told me. I'll be vague where necessary so as to avoid implying medical claims, and more to the point, I want to be clear that different people have different microbial profiles of gut dysbiosis. Hence, what works for one individual may not work for another, including you. Nevertheless, Elixa has grown significantly from word of mouth for a reason, the actual results. And so, For previous customers, the details of what exactly is the difference in these results is important. So let me tell you what early users of V6 have reported. To begin with, the usual Elixa improvements in terms of mood, energy, skin, and digestive function. But what has been really highlighted with V6 by early users is a significantly improved effect for sleep. And the mental improvements that they've reported have featured more references to feeling calm, in addition to the usual reports from Elixa users such as a positive disposition, more energy, happier in general. Another thing with V6 is significant improvement in bowel movement ease and a significant improvement in bowel movement form. And this will be noticeable once you have adapted to the prebiotic. In fact, it's a very good indicator that full adaptation to the prebiotic has been achieved. And for some, this will be very rapidly, and for some, it might take a little longer. There are many other notable improvements reported that are more specific to individuals and what problem they are targeting, but I don't wish to imply any medical claims, so I'll omit them here. So how can you get Elixa version 6? Well, firstly, just to avoid confusion, the only version I sell is the latest version. You can purchase Elixa directly from our website via the link beneath this video, or simply Googling Elixa Probiotic. We ship to almost every country. Our UK dispatch facility covers the UK and Europe and most other countries, and our US dispatch facility covers the USA. If we're sold out of stock in the US, we ship directly from the UK using express tracked airmail, and in general we use express tracked airmail for everyone else outside of the UK. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your Elixa course.